The U.S. begins a new year with a divided Congress, ending 2 years of one-party control. Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine still raging, and China continues to expand its military. What does it all mean for the economy and your money? Joining me now, Capital Group International Vice Chairman and former U.S. Ambassador to Germany, John Emerson. John, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jack, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well. So it is not a Happy New Year in Ukraine. It's going to be a long, cold, and dark winter over there. Speaking more broadly, what does this mean for international relations and the international economy?
Well, I give you three frames to think about this with. Number one, I think it's fair to say that February 24th, which is the day the invasion started, was the last day of the post-Cold War era. Now, what marked that era? Obviously, the fall of the wall and the dissolution of the USSR, but also, particularly for Europe, there was a huge peace dividend. And what we saw during this era was an embracing of globalization and an integration, an effort to integrate Russia and China into the global economy. Well, you know what? Those days are over. We're now in a completely new time, and that bell will not be unrung. The second thing to keep in mind is this is a war that, as you noted, it's going to go on for a long time. It's not a war that either Zelensky nor Putin can afford to lose. It's not a war that either of them can win. I mean, Vladimir Putin already lost the war he wanted to fight, which was a war to overwhelm Kyiv, decapitate the Zelensky government, dominate, subjugate Ukraine. Question now is whether he can win the war that he is fighting, which is just to hang on to what he already has. And it's not a war that Zelensky can win because he's defined winning as pushing Russia out of every square inch of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. And I think that's a bit unrealistic. And because it's a war neither of them can afford to lose and neither of them can win, it's a war that neither of them can currently stop. And in terms of China, what is interesting is in my recent trips to Germany, I've heard both from government leaders and leaders of some of the major companies there, they're starting to ask the question, do we really want to be as dependent on China for our economic and commercial prosperity as we have been on Russia for our energy needs?
Well, certainly that same question is being asked in the U.S. And in the U.S., we're wondering, do we have to diversify that supply chain, nearshore, onshore? But let's pivot to the U.S. Congress. We're going to see a new Congress this year and in 2023. And you've got some experience in the halls of Washington. Unpack that for us.
Well, I think several things. Number one, the Biden legislative agenda is not going very far in a new Congress, that's for sure. With the possible exception of tough on China legislation, it seems to be one of the few things that we can get everybody together on in Congress. It was interesting, the omnibus package did have a couple of things in it that were quite positive for the investment world. The fact that people would not have to take the required minimum distribution on their IRAs until they're 75 instead of 72, and the fact that some of the funds that people have allowed to build up in 529 accounts can be rolled over to Roth IRAs and other interesting things, including a huge package of relief aid and weapons aid to Ukraine. But the one thing I worry most about is with the tight with a close control that in the House of Representatives, and the reality that what I call the Marjorie Taylor Greene caucus is going to have almost veto power over anything the incoming speaker is going to want to do in the House of Representatives. I worry about not only your basic housekeeping legislation, but something like the debt ceiling, because there are a number of members that have already served notice that they have absolutely no intention of negotiating with the White House over the debt ceiling. And this debt ceiling dance, which, as we know, it's not about new spending, it's about Congress funding checks that it's already written. But this debt ceiling dance goes to the down to the wire, and then always there's a deal that's agreed upon, and we move on. But this time there could be some real concerns about the fair faith and credit of the United States being honored as we move into the February and March timeframe when this is going to come up, and that could roil markets.
Yeah, that's certainly economically dangerous. Before I let you go, I got to ask you, we have an election coming up in 2024 that is going to add all the more weight to those issues you just talked about. Who will be running in that election, John?
You want to win a bar bet? Bet on a rematch.
Wow.
I honestly think regardless of the challenges that Donald Trump is experiencing, he's got such a hold over that, 35% of the Republican primary electorate in a multi-candidate field. He can run the table again and win most of the delegates with that. And Joe Biden's made it pretty clear that certainly if Trump runs, he's running. And a lot of Democrats are starting to say, you know what, he deserves to run. He's had a pretty good run in the last, certainly in the last 6-12 months of his presidency and with the midterm elections. So I would bet on a rematch.
And who wins?
That's going to depend on 45 to 65,000 people. Fewer people, and you can fit in any major NFL stadium on a Sunday afternoon in 5 or 6 states are going to answer that question. No matter what the popular vote is, the Electoral College is literally going to come down to a few tens of thousands of voters. So honestly, tough question to answer 2 years out.
Well, it doesn't sound like a great way to run an election, but I think that's how it's going to be. Ambassador John Emerson, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jack.